Para nós do Nocaute é uma alegria, uma honra ter aqui essa figura fascinante que é o Danny Glover, que todo mundo conhece como ator e como ativista político, sempre ao lado das boas causas, e nascido no dia 22 de julho de 1946. Por que eu sei o detalhe? Porque eu também nasci no dia 22 de julho de 1946.
It's my little brother, the 22nd of July?
Yes.
Oh, man, I have another brother of the 22nd of July. I love it. I love it. There's something about the 22nd of July, you know, that and certainly over the years, you know, friends that I've acquired who were born the 22nd of July. I just was in Costa Rica, and a friend I've known since college, and we worked together in the city.
The Costa Rica, the filmmaker? No.
Costa Rica, país.
Costa Rica. Achei que era Costa Rica.
Costa Rica. The friend that I had, we just spent some time, Herman Gonzalez. And Herman and I met, we were on strike during the strike of 1968 at our university. And then we went and worked in public service, city government. And I saw him just recently in Costa Rica. And our birthdays, he's a couple of years older than me, but our birthdays are the 22nd of July. And I don't know if we've retained our friendship through our level of activism, from students to working in public service, and that was the foundation of our friendship. And others, the great poet Quincy Troop, the 22nd of July. So these symbols in some relationships that I have is important. I always think the dates are important.
Yes.
Yeah.
Eu nasci na cidade de Mariana, que foi vítima daquela tragédia ambiental, daquele crime, e no dia que eu soube, eu telefonei para lá, para um irmão, e perguntei, alguma autoridade já apareceu aí para ser solidário? Ele me respondeu, um irmão que mora lá em Mariana, a única autoridade que apareceu aqui até agora foi o Danny Glover. Ele foi a Mariana se solidarizar com a população que era vítima da tragédia ambiental.
Oh, boy. I think one of the clarities around my life is that however that came about, and I don't take a lot of credit for it. There's that I always want to be there. I feel that it's necessary to be there to bear witness to something that's happened, and to say to people in the simplest way, beyond any ideological bridge that we may have, is that I care, and for me that story was important to me. If that's the quality that came about through the time frame in which I was born, and also within the framework in which I was politicized, socialized, you know, the civil rights movement, people who went down because they really cared, who went down to the South and embraced themselves with people in the South because they cared about what was happening. They sincerely cared. And they were young people. So it's a certain kind of idealism as well that goes along with that. You know, of that, my place there and my responsibility is to go down there and to hold them to hear their story. And that's basically who I am. And another part of that is that I think also I'm celebrating their courage. I'm acknowledging their courage, not celebrating, acknowledging their courage. And whenever whenever I've had an opportunity to that, because I don't know if I could be as courageous as they are.
Pois é, uma coisa que eu queria perguntar a ele que diz respeito a isso é o seguinte: ele é identificado hoje no mundo inteiro como um cara permanentemente solidário com a América Latina, com os movimentos de libertação da América Latina. Se a gente olhar para o mapa da América Latina de 10 anos atrás, a gente vai ver que só tinha amigos nossos e amigos do povo latino-americano. E hoje não, hoje está cheio de ditadura de novo, aqui no Brasil, inclusive. O que, na opinião dele, o que houve para produzir essa mudança tão ruim na América Latina nos últimos anos?
Well, you know, I'm not an expert on that. I can only testify to the fact that there was, in fact, an enormous energy, an enormous response to what was happening in Latin America. You know, a great deal of that celebrated what was happening, but a great deal of that denounced what was happening as well. Here in Brazil, the election of a worker in Lula, a worker was extraordinary. Someone who had come up through the ranks, who had no formal training educationally, but who had, in any sense, had such an extraordinary resonance with people. The people, when he touched people, when he walked in, that people believed him, in a sense, and how that was transformed into some of the most extraordinary changes in Brazil itself, with respect to Colombo people, with respect to African descendants, and with respect to women, you know, with respect to the issues of poverty and all those things, and inclusiveness within the whole governance process, the whole governmental process. So all of this was encouraging to watch, because my thinking is that if I can see this somewhere and be moved by it and encouraged by it to some action, then perhaps this is in some ways replicable in some places, in other places as well. And so when I came to here and saw all of that happening and everything else, I had hoped that people would look on this moment in the same way that I'd look on this moment, as a moment of encouragement, as long as that, you know, from the World Social Forum. The World Social Forum came right out of here. Who comes out of the World Social Forum? Evo Morales comes out of the World Social Forum. You know, all these things, someone who, in defense of his country, Bolivia, was fighting the privatization of water. So all those things were the symbols that I thought, in some sense, represent a shift in what was happening in the world, what was happening in this region, and this region was finding its own, the most diverse region. You know, you could say it's the incredible diversity in here was an important factor as well.
Pois é, mas no meio de tudo isso que a gente podia chamar de progressos sociais, os Estados Unidos me elegem um sujeito chamado Donald Trump. Como é que ele interpreta isso? Que, sabe, o mesmo país que tem um ativista como Danny Glover acaba escolhendo como presidente da República um louco, um tarado como o Trump. Como é que um norte-americano, ativista, sindicalista, comprometido como você, qual foi o choque ao ver a vitória do Trump?
It's a question I think we're still asking ourselves. But it's a question that also underlines the forces that affect our lives in ways that even disempower us. There are many explanations for the election of Donald Trump. You know, some could even talk about the advent of reality television was a factor in electing Donald Trump. So many different other ways in which this is. Some could say that people have become so disenchanted with governance in itself, they've elected someone outside of the whole process. And those people who elected him, if you look at the demographics, now we're always those poor, disenfranchised white people who felt that they were strangers in their own country, but often those people who had incomes that were middle-class incomes, they're well-positioned, they certainly were concerned about the fact that their wages had become stagnant. Along with that, they were concerned about other factors, about being left out of the political dialogue that was happening in the country and the change that. There's so many different reasons why this occurred. Also, we don't have, we talk about the idea of democracy in the United States, but there's no kind of real kind of electoral, a place where we have a significant role in the electoral process. And there are different ways, and voters are disenfranchised for many reasons. Voters people find a certain apathy toward the electoral process and do not participate in it, except during the general election that happens every 4 years. They may participate, but where do people participate, and who are the ones that participate in that process during the years, the alternate years, when they're the election of state officials or city officials or county officials? All those are important ways in which you nurture a culture around politics. And it seems as if people dissuaded from doing that by various ways, they're dissuaded from doing it by the fact that they don't feel involved. All of those things play a factor in the kind of, the kind of lack of interest in the type of, you have, this is when the movements that I see happening around movements around Latin America, and I felt they were movements that were happening occasionally. They were active people 24 hours discussing the dynamics of change, discussing the possibilities of what the future would be and all that, and using the electoral process as a reference for those the visions in which they anticipated or what they wanted to see as citizens.
Há ano, mais ou menos, eu fiz uma entrevista com o Assange, Julian Assange, aí na Embaixada do Equador em Londres. E ele afirmou que é possível provar que os Estados Unidos estavam por trás do golpe que derrubou a Dilma, aqui, por causa do petróleo, e meses depois o presidente da Turquia, Erdogan, disse que a tentativa de golpe lá também foi armada pelos Estados Unidos por causa da longa fronteira com a Rússia que eles têm. Na sua opinião, você acha que os Estados Unidos têm responsabilidade nesses golpes que a gente tem visto aqui?
I believe they played a role in it. I believe that the U.S., in some sense, because of its own interests, and the much more, the larger picture, as we all know, in terms, because the idea of the nation state itself, the implications around there are the idea, the act of sovereignty, self-determination itself. And the more and more that Latin American countries, whether it's Bolivia, whether it's Argentina, whether it's Ecuador, most notably Venezuela and Brazil, the more and more they in themselves begin to reshape the narrative around their own relationship as nation state, and the self-determination around that. The more and more U.S. policy, foreign policy, plays in from this very archaic vision of, the more it plays in that, the more it attempts to undermine and overthrow those forces within the country, to subvert those forces. It's done that historically in Latin America from the Monroe Doctrine in 1823. It's done that historically. It felt that that Latin America was its sphere of influence. It continues with that chauvinistic mentality in relationship to Latin America, and it's beyond administration and beyond the kind of cultural shifts and certainly certainly the political shifts internally within the United States. What shapes U.S. policy in Latin America has always been that they were the dominant force in the region, and therefore, whether it's the staged coups, as we saw the coup d'etats that happened, military coup d'etats that happened throughout Latin America in the early 60s, and in some sense, using that as a platform to undermine and destabilize whatever political process that was going on internally. Because there's a political process that goes on internally in all our countries, all countries. You know, Latin America's had a long history of its own sense of self-determination and its own sense of entitlement, in a sense, from Simon Boulevard. So it's historic trends that have happened. And I'm sorry that I'm talking so long, but in that sense, all those play into the policy that U.S. has adopted, not simply in this region, but it's adopted from the standpoint of his position as the how would you say, the voice of the free world.
Você acompanha já há algum tempo, desde o tempo do presidente Chávez, o processo venezuelano. A Venezuela tem 302 bilhões de barris de petróleo debaixo da terra, a reserva. Você acha que as agressões norte-americanas contra a Venezuela são por democracia ou são por petróleo?
I think it's a little bit deeper than that. You know, I think the idea, as I mentioned before, the idea of organizing your viewpoint of yourself and the relationships you have around self-determination as a national referendum, in that sense. That's what it became. Chavez's ascension, the presidency, had become a national referendum around self-determination and everything. And what are we going to do with that? The act that was often we always think of this from the vantage point of Venezuela having this enormous amount of oil, crude oil, and the fact that oil becomes the link between the industrial world and the continued flow of its progress and everything else. What's something much deeper that was going on is the change within how that money, profits from the oil, was used. If it's used to reduce poverty, if it's used to increase housing, accessibility housing, if it's used for education, then that's a whole different reference. That's a different reference. So here's a country with this enormous wealth underground and used to that. And certainly at the moment that the prices of oil were very high, they were capable of creating the social programs that were uplifting the people. That's the danger. We play with the other ideas. Those programs, that's the danger. If they were able to bring trained doctors, if they were able to bring Cuban doctors in and set up a program in which those doctors were able to bring better health care to the citizens of Venezuela. And Venezuela is relatively small. 25 million people is the population of Venezuela with all this oil. So the changes that can happen within that population can be so dramatic if there's the political will to make those changes. So the political will was created by the social movement, which we had already demanded that through the electoral process. The political will is that. So the danger is that how do you break the political will of that? And the new forms of relationships. You take the new forms of relationship, Petro-Carib, the new forms of relationship with Aula, or all these things were now, in some sense, creating a regional relationship that was dangerous and everything. And these were sponsored and supported by those people, those countries, from Bolivia to Argentina to Ecuador to Brazil. All those things were dangerous in terms of sustaining and maintaining power. So we can leave the oil here. The oil that stays in the ground, if it's a later date, or you drill the oil and you pump the drill out. But the fabric of the social chain, what was happening there, it was the most dangerous aspect to that, to not only to U.S. sense of stability in the region. Because what you do like what has been done before. Your change, in a sense, reflects the insecurity of the empire itself. And also, that change in itself says to other people, not simply in the region, but other places in the world, that if you could do this, maybe we could do this. There's another relationship, and the relationship to power. And that's been a dominant relationship, the relationship over the last 500 years. You know, from the moment that this relationship, and particularly as the U.S. has extended itself or become this world power.
Você foi nomeado pela ONU como embaixador dessa década para questões afrodescendentes. Aqui no Brasil, a questão racial está umbilicalmente ligada à questão social. As pessoas são discriminadas não só porque são negras, mas são todas pobres. Você vê isso em outras regiões do mundo, uma situação semelhante à nossa, que o racismo não é só racial, mas é também social, é também uma questão de classe?
There are many determinants in how we look at this, and certainly the relationship between power, property, and race, class, and everything are evident in the United States as well. The United States became the power that became on the back of slavery and the production of cotton. You know, the United States at the time of the Revolution was a minor colony within the whole chain of colonies that British control. The fact that after the expansion of cotton, expansionism that took place, where cotton became the first tool, the first fuel for the Industrial Revolution. It changed the whole situation, cotton. And by virtue of that, the United States, within the first part of the 19th century, became one of the most powerful country in the world economically. How that plays itself out with what was happening with British industrialists and the beginning of the Industrial Revolution plays a certain role within that context. Since cotton wasn't a major product in Brazil, because Brazil had the largest number of slaves to come here, 10 million slaves. Africans came through here, in a sense. There are other dynamics that happen with respect to that as well. But certainly, if we're going to talk about democracy, the litmus test for democracy has to sit around African descendants, Africans. If we're going to talk about that, the measuring stick in which we think about democracy itself, and what the fulfillment of the ideals around democracy, which are simple ideals, dynamics around citizens and citizen action. The issue of race is central to that, in the realization of it for any of us, whether we're in Brazil, or the 200 million people in Brazil, or we're in the United States, with the more than 340 million people in the United States. So that becomes the center point in which we look at the idea of democracy. It's centered to that. Because of Brazil's position, you know, in terms of the demographics of race, where more than half of the population is African descendant, it becomes critical here. Brazil has the potential to lead not only the cry for democracy and the cry for racial justice, reparatory justice, right here, not only for this country itself, but for the region and perhaps even further than that, for the rest of the world as well. So those are the kind of things that are necessary to understand, and so we can't just push the idea of race aside when we look at what is happening, and it has to happen here in Brazil. We have to, in a sense, if we're going to call that, if we're going to call on that inclusiveness that we say, and the building of a diverse state, the building of a dynamic democracy, that's going to be it's going to be a major leap, even if we had Lula right here, even if we had Dilma, even if we had a progressive Westcom, all the things that we have to talk about that and place it at the center of it. And I think most of the conversation that I've had around the issue, that issue around race, has been from that vantage point, that we cannot move a step further if we're not, whether we're talking in the Caribbean, we're talking the relationships that have been forged over the last 500 years, have to, in some sense, have an extraordinary, metaphoric, whatever kind, extraordinary change in order for us to not only create the world, the systems of relationships that are necessary for us to survive, for humanity to survive, for us to deal with climate change and global warming, but I've always seen to deal with justice itself.
Você que tem uma visão universal desse problema, como é que você identifica a raiz da doença, o ovo da serpente, num lugar como o Brasil, que 50% da população é negra? Nós temos, de 35 ministros, temos um ministro negro, e em 500 anos de história tivemos um único ministro da Suprema Corte negro. Onde está a raiz disso? Onde é que está a tragédia por trás disso? Esse país que teve a sua riqueza construída muito com a mão escrava que veio da África. Como é que um país retribui tão mal a um povo como a população negra que veio construir esse país? Como é que você explica isso? Tem explicação para essa doença?
I would be presumptuous if I could tell you if I was an Afro-descendant Brazilian, if I was grown up in here, I would have had some sort of maybe opportunity to understand more what that dilemma is and how that dilemma, the psychological impact that race and racism has on people's lives. The historic memory, the journey from that. It's a journey. Let me tell you, I can sit here and talk as much as I want to talk about the issues that we bring up. But at the same time, my grandmother was born a slave. My great-grandmother was born a slave, and that is a part of both my own political, historic, and social sense of myself, in some sense. I can sit up here with the opportunities that I have and talk to you. What are the things that influenced my life, Danny Glover's life? What are the things that, in a sense, made him insecure, made him feel less than, and all those things? And what are the bridges that he takes? What are the movements in his life? What things that he has done in his life to kind of not succumb to that, but to try to feel as if I'm worthy in some way? Those are listening. That's 70 years of my life. You understand that? So on the one hand, and it's a continuum. It doesn't happen to that. How do I know that I'm going to pass on what I felt and the depth of what I felt? How am I going to pass that on to my children and those who follow me in such a way that they take whatever I felt, translated what I felt, and them themselves aspire to something beyond what I felt? All those things happen. And they happen on the level of family, community, and everything else. And they happen on a national level as well, in a sense. So for me to say that to get to where I am, to get to this particular point, in this sense, it's the internal struggles as well as the forces outside of that in their most insidious ways, in their most absolute ways, and the various ways, and their most subtle ways, tell me, as Muhammad Ali told me one time when he whispered in my ear, still a nigger. He understood that, but he understood something else deeper than what you'd have to do. He understood the history of that, all of that. And all those things you battle with, you fight with, and everything else. You try to, in some sense, find a different way that what had happened if I didn't have the instrument that I have? What had happened if something happened in my life that I was incarcerated, and how that determined and predetermined a whole set of the circumstances that would happen in my life, that would go on in my life. All those happen. Take that, the individual, Danny Glover, who everyone knows is successful and everyone knows of this and that and that. Take that in a sense and multiply that by the millions and tens of million people of who have to fight with it, who come to the world with no entitlement. All they come in is that they have to struggle to that. And the courageous, James Baldwin, one of the greatest writers and the most amazing people that you'd ever want, said if a black man living in Alabama needs to get a Medal of Honor, surviving in Alabama. And so what he was saying, just surviving in Alabama, he said they deserve, when he went to Alabama and saw a black man, he said they deserve a medal. Take that in the historic, take that Brazil in that sense. So the idea of race happens from those who in their various forms of control and dominance. The idea of race in the sense plays out there, but it plays out in terms of our consciousness and our own sense of ourselves, and fighting against it, and fighting every day. Fighting every day that my mama fought, every day that my dad fought, every day that my grandmother and grandfather fought, and every day that those people before me fought. And that's the question. That becomes a question. How do we now accept that truth around race? How do we do everything in our power, your power, those people who have power? How do you use every single thing in your life to use that as the center of what happens? There are going to be insecurities, there are going to be fears, there are going to be angers, we're experiencing that right now. Anybody who talks about shithole countries, anybody who talks about Mexicans are rapists and thieves and everything else, and all the other kind of cliches that have gone down in history, you find them alive still in the 21st century? After all the work that's been done, that's insane. And to elect someone to be the president who has those sentiments and feelings, it's insane. Whatever, but it is. It's the reality. It's constructed around a construct that even though it portends to have accomplished something, really in the long run has not accomplished something. And it's based in a society where the ideas of the 20th century are about the self, not community, about self, about ideas around self, about ideas of accumulation of accumulation, whatever it is, a different kind of accumulation of this cup, another trinket here, another trinket there, another computer here. All those are kind of realities that we have, and it says our car and everything else. And the danger you feel if you can't accumulate have that car. All those are the dynamics of the 20th century. You move people from the land. You take them from the source of creation. You take them out there and you leave them as pawns within this system, whether you get a middle-class job or you get a low-paid job, in a system which only determines who you are by virtue of what you own and possess. All those things are played out within this system. What happened in Brazil, since World War II has been accommodated with more technology, more access to different forms of technology than any country in the region and any country in the world, and yet it has the lowest index in terms of poverty. How do you scratch your head? The lowest index, every single way, education, poverty, race, all those things right there. Why can you have this abundance of wealth, an incredible wealth with 200 million people, and you can't find a way in which there is justice in some sense, as a just society, not for all Brazilians, not just African descendants, but for all Brazilians? How can you kind of find? What are the questions? What are we standing up against? And understand that, and how deeply inwoven is that in this psyche, and that you have to now eclipse 500 years of this, more than 500 years of this, to a point where you can say, God, I really realized what it means to be a human being.
Alguns norte-americanos brancos se sentem incomodados de ver uma estrela de Hollywood como você defendendo o oposto dos interesses e da ideologia do establishment norte-americano. Eles reagem mal a isso, que você é uma estrela mundial.
Well, the mainstream fluctuates in so many different ways. What do we have here, in a sense? You know, the analogies. How do you place with the analysis, the analogy? You know, I mean, there are people who are good Negroes and people who are bad Negroes. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, there are people who basically you're able to tolerate to a certain level and listen to what they have to say, and then move on and find the Negro who you're able to talk to, and he becomes more sensible. You know, that's a very fine line. You know, I'm not going to present to you the 10-point program of the Black Panther Party. You know, in 19 that was functional. That was necessary when those brothers got together and did that. But I can't present that to you right now in 19. I could present Black Lives Matters have presented some points to that and reference to that, and they're women, so it's women-centered, and they present some point to that. But what I'm saying, and not being facetious and everything, but what it is that there is a certain tolerance in the conversation and certain cultural tolerance in the sense, like what the message is. You know, you have an art form like hip hop comes into being, and the expression of the hip hop is real. I mean, it's right to the source of the issue, whether it's police brutality, whether it's poverty, and all that things in hip hop. But you have music play that role in itself. But if you define music, and I'm sorry if I get on time. When the Impressions and Curtis Mayfield said, "People get ready, there's a change coming." You know, people had a sense in that space, in that historical moment, that there were changes were coming. So the music itself, in a sense, was a prelude or a kind of uplifting point in terms of the changes that are possible and everything else. And all this happens in the same. Then you get here a generation later, after the changes supposedly have come, and you got guys in this urban area coming out with this hip hop and dangerous, dangerous stuff, dangerous, the police brutality and everything else, and all those things happen in the music itself. So what you do is you say, that's not acceptable. That's not an acceptable narrative, in a sense. So you commodify it. You do it in certain ways. You commodify it. Who are the safe Negroes? Who are the safe hip hoppers? Who are all those things? Who are the safe rappers and everything else? And they change the form of music, talking about a whole other context of women and everything else outside of the social context in which the art form began. Outside the political and social context that art form began. That's real deep. So the system itself has its ways of kind of diverting our interests and everything else. And certainly in that sense, as long as I could say something. When I came into acting, side I was on acting, I thought I could be of some use. I had my own platform. I can do the work of the great South African writer, Athol Fugard, who dealt with the issue of apartheid. Right there. I can not only do his work, I can express what is important to me in the world. It was at a moment where people began to galvanize and come together around free, Nelson Mandela, end of apartheid, all the slogans that we remember at that particular point in the time, in the mid-'70s and late 70s and all the way into the 80s. You understand? So I was in a safe place. To be honest, I was in a place where I could do cultural art, cultural production that expressed my view and my relationship to the world, in a sense, and everybody embraced it. Now, Now, if Nelson Mandela came out of jail a Marxist-Leninist, then we'd have had some other kind of thing. Medieval came out of jail. But you have to sense, you understand that. So within the framework of expression, even during that framework, I was able to do a movie, a genre movie, an action, drama, comedy, buddy movie, and it features on Kungarans and laundering of South African money and everything else in some fictitious way, to the point that the South African government, still under apartheid, bans the movie from being seen in South Africa. You know what I'm saying? So you're sitting on top of the world in some sense. You're sitting in a relationship, an expression, but it comes a little bit deeper than that. So South Africa and whatever's happening now, and the calamity of what's happening, or whatever we want to think would happen is happening in South Africa and everything else, that's changed. So in the sense of where do you place your role as a citizen first, and a cultural artist within this framework that you try to do. I've tried and doing that, and at the same time navigate through the apathy or the lack of effort that happens, or the diversion of interest that happens within this society and the country I live in. All those things are the kind of things that you deal with. Not that it says that when I said I'm looking for at every point in time, how are people, wherever I can identify, how are people going through a transformative process? If I go to Venezuela and they're going through the transformation happen, and I not only through the eyes of its dynamic president, but through the eyes of the people themselves. How do I begin to celebrate that and use that as a platform to talk about the world, to talk about possibility, and to talk about the transformation of relationship, political, social, historical relationships, all those kinds of things. So if the president comes to me in my first meeting with President Hugo Chavez and says, I just come from Haiti, says to me, we owe so much to the Haitian people. We of Latin America owe so much to the Haitian people. Boom. The light comes on in my brain. What is he talking about? What is this relationship? What is that? He knows more about Haiti. The people of Venezuela, through the Boulevard Revolution, know about Haiti than anybody else, than me and the people in my own country. They know about the Haitian Revolution. I go to a classroom of kids, man. I say, you know about the French Revolution, American Revolution? What about the Haitian Revolution? Never heard of it. You know what I'm saying? So all of these are the kind of fixtures that you navigate through and everything. But he says something out here. Then I see the action itself. And when he says something to me, when he says the Constitution we had, that Constitution, 25 million people, Constitution, we took care of women, we took care of indigenous people. These are the things we wrote in the Constitution, everything. But we didn't take care of what we need to do with African descendants. Look at my hair. Look at my lips. My grandmother was African. That's another key place. What do you do? And then what are the political projects, as my brother James earlier was saying, what are the political projects put in place to change that? And saying, let's address this. Let's talk about address this. It doesn't, and for the moment, you set up the projects themselves in such a way in which you hope that they become the prelude to the transformation, not simply that's the transformation by supplying, but another way in which we conceive and receive each other as well.
Mais uma pergunta. Nos anos 70, as ditaduras militares patrocinadas pelos Estados Unidos eram sangrentas, punham tanques na rua, prendiam, torturavam, censuravam. Agora, nesta década, nós tivemos aqui na América do Sul 3 presidentes da República eleitos pelo povo e que foram derrubados sem um tiro, sem uma prisão. O presidente do Paraguai, o bispo Lugo, Fernando Lugo, o presidente de Honduras, Zelaya, e a presidenta Dilma Rousseff, aqui no Brasil. Os três foram derrubados, aparentemente, legalmente, entre aspas. Você acha que o império está mudando de métodos? Está trocando a luva de boxe por uma luva de pelica?
There's always been that change. The change. In Roosevelt, in the 30s, Franklin Delano Roosevelt in the 30s used another policy toward Latin America because he was dealing with the impending wars in Europe and everything, with Germany and all that. So there's a way in which Latin America was kind of like hands off to some degree. I mean, there, understanding the historic relationship that they have in Latin America was always there, you know. So then you have you have what happens around the world. I mean, around the world, after World War II, the world all of it changes. The colonial empires that had dominated for more you know, since the particularly since the 1885 decision to divide up Africa, but all over the world, all those things were falling apart. The victory of the Chinese Revolution, 1949. The victory of the Cuban Revolution in 1959, 10 years later. The victories that were happening not only through electoral processes that were happening, policies and political processes that were happening, but all the victories that happened in armed struggle. The Vietnam War, the defeat of the French in Dien Bien Phu, it changed the complexion of the world what's happening around here. So you had to say that, and particularly I think with my own, I'm like I said, I'm not a historian, but the victory of the Cuban Revolution in this region, not somewhere right there, 90 miles from your beachland right here, was huge in terms of changing the direction in which that. So what it was, every military dictatorship, every country, you know, certainly Allende, the election of Allende in 1973, and the eventual overthrow of Allende, was that one change that we saw post the military dictatorships, and then just people's will. People determining in Brazil, in Argentina, in Venezuela, Uruguay, all over the place, begin to struggle and begin to use the process from the bottom up of bringing about the changes they want. So you have this particular moment right here, but it came after a whole generation of young people were murdered, artists were murdered, killed. Yeah, all those who were in opposition, tortured, killed, went into exile. All of that happened in that period of time. Now you have this particular moment right here that emerges from the bottom up, from the barrios, from the favelas, from everywhere. It comes to people coming from the countryside and everything else, and people demanding something else. And it comes through the process where you have, how can you say that with the Carter Institute says the best election they on record was the Venezuelan election, where you had mass participation and you also mass validation of a no fraud within the election itself. You know, it's comical. It's almost comical. Here what's happening in Honduras just recently, where they took the bars, they stopped the election, changed the dynamics, and it's comical. It is comical when you talk about the idea of democracy. So people have used this form, this way of electoral process as a way of changing, and have been effective. And have been, for the most part, effective because they brought into existence various kind of policies which begin to make that transformative process of changing who we are and what we mean to each other as a community, as a nation, community nation. All that's happening. That's what's happening. That is what is happening exactly right now, right in front of our face. And because of the way, the process of silencing people. What is it? The silence system? In some places they criminalize. I see it in my own country. How are you going to criminalize a group of women who says that we're just tired of looking at black men being and black women and trans, and LGBT the community being violent, being the police attacking them. We're tired of doing that, so we're gonna forward something, and but you're gonna criminalize them, you know, in that sense, never looking at the real bottom line, the question itself, never looking at the question itself. the kind of historians now who in the 21st century to even talk about race, cotton, and slavery in ways that had never been spoken about before. But the research was always there, you know. W.B. Du Bois's mammoth, incredible work that he worked on from 1936 to 1941, a Black Reconstruction, refutes all of the lies that were told for the last 70 years before its publication about the role that Black people played after the Civil War and what they brought to the consciousness of people, ex-slaves, how they were able to manipulate the policies that they used and abused them, how they were manipulated in a certain way and transform the changes in the country. And it was lied about. So the history has always been there. The history has always been there. The history of this country and this continent is yet to be. It's in the process right now. It's being told every time that we hear people coming together, whether they're African descendants or whether they're just ordinary working people, whether they're poor peasants and farmers. The history is being made in this country, and that's the history we're going to count on. Need to count on for our own transformation.
Bom, agora a última, eu juro. O Brasil está atravessando uma fase extremamente difícil. O candidato que tem a ampla maioria do apoio da população, que é o Lula, está sendo impedido de ser candidato por crimes que ele não cometeu. Que palavras você teria para os brasileiros, seus amigos, seus admiradores, diante de uma situação tão cinzenta, tão turva?
It was a message that Lula left with me when we parted yesterday. It's the first Portuguese I learned and heard. A luta continua.
A luta continua. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. My twin.
My friend.
Thank you very much.